Hello, and welcome to Interrobang Chats. I'm really pleased today to have with me Micah Nemerever, and we're going to discuss the new book, These Violent Delights, which publishes September 15th. Micah, welcome.
Thank you. So nice of you to have me.
Really nice to have you too. And you're joining us from Seattle today, that's right?
Yeah,
And that's where you live?
it is. Yeah.
Okay. Um, well, I love this book.
Thank you.
It's so compulsively readable. I mean, you start it, you just can't put it down.
Thank you so
It's
much.
it's a tale of obsessive love and philosophical meanderings about morality and crime. And it's just a really, really well told story. And
Thank
I wondered
you.
whether you might want to kind of set the stage for us in terms of introducing us what the story is about.
Sure. It's set in Pittsburgh in the early 1970s. And it's so like just post Stonewall, but just barely, and it really hasn't reached past New York at this point. It's a queer love story that yeah, it's about a lonely artsy teenager, college freshman named Paul. He's working through a recent family trauma, the death of his father, and his family is like really strained by this, but they're a very close-knit family, and they love him dearly and don't really understand him. Angsty teenagers, as you know. And so yeah, he has a lot of latent, like, repressed anger and uncertainty about what he wants to be. And then he befriends and eventually falls in love with a boy named Julian, who is very different from him. He's extroverted and not shy, much more off the cuff, articulate, and also from a very posh background. That Paul is very working class, so there's an interesting dynamic there. But so it's a story about how these two, like, they're both deeply flawed and in their own ways deeply insecure people, and they they have an interesting dynamic where their their personalities lock together in a way where it both their worst traits feed off each other and also their best traits. So it's this very complicated relationship that they have, but it because of this fundamental insecurity and this sort of obsession that they build for each other, things get out of control, and it kind of spirals from an opening of sort of yeah, it just yeah, it leads to a climactic event that kind of just blows everything up. So yeah.
Well, I thought it was really, I'm not quite sure how you did it. Some crazy talented alchemy on your part, I guess. But this book is so intense, and you feel the intensity of these men's relationship to one another in a way that when I was going back over the book to prepare for this interview, because I'd read it months ago, I was thinking to myself, well, how is this intensity built and sustained? And I was going back and forth between, is it just like a great ability on your part to pace things? Or is it that the descriptions are so really kind of impactful in terms of the emotions that these two guys inspire in one another? And I don't know whether I figured it out, but in terms of um, depicting an obsessive kind of love, you absolutely nailed it.
Thank
It's
you.
really wonderful in that.
Thank you so much for very kind words.
And it's um, it's also very much the type of novel that I absolutely love, because I love a thriller or a mystery like anyone else, but this is very much a novel of ideas. And in fact, that's when Paul and Julian meet, right? They meet in a freshman um, class on one of the first days of school for them, and it is a class on, I might have it a little bit wrong, but as I recall, the ethics of science, more or less.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and they both come from different backgrounds. Paul studies biology and Julian studies psychology, so that they have different backgrounds in ethics. Paul is fairly attuned to things like medical experimentation on humans and things like that. And Julian very very attuned to social psychology, which the Milgram experiment is a recurring theme. So they both bring something different to this conversation that they have with each other. They're both very cynical about human nature in the 20th century. Yeah, that the setting of the 1970s was very deliberate. I chose it to be around the time the Tuskegee experiment kind of broke in the news, and also it's just a generation removed from the Holocaust, and both characters are Jewish, and so it really hangs over the book, like this kind of shadow of what happened in the middle of the 20th century, and kind of like coming down from the idealism of the 60s and realizing that it didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So they meet in this class and they kind of find a connection through this class discussion. And basically, what they're talking about is kind of the morality of people that follow authority.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna forget what the name is though, but I remember when, in my psychology class, I'm a lot older than you, but we actually watched this Milgram experiment, all of us together in psychology class. And this is the one some of our viewers might remember where people are basically told to shock other people with electrical currents. And it's really, really disturbing experiment. I remember watching it. I would have been in 10th grade at the time, so not very old, but not much younger than these guys when they're watching it. And I guess you explained well how Paul and Julian kind of come from different worlds, and they come to this question of the morality of following authority from different viewpoints, but they're both really very confident and sure of themselves in their view that there's nothing moral about following orders, that there's something deficient in these people because they were able to follow orders. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
Yeah, definitely. And they come at it from different angles. Like Paul's father was a refugee from the Holocaust and struggled with his mental health his whole life because of that. So Paul has a very visceral reason to think that just following orders is not an excuse. And so that's sort of his background. And Julian comes from a very privileged background. Like, he went to prep school. His family is kind of passing as Episcopalian to kind of try and play themselves off as more elite than they actually are. But they have money, and he's very familiar with people of privilege and how people of privilege kind of don't question don't question their moral rightness at all. And so it's so they're both coming at it from these very different angles, but they come together, and neither of them have much reason to be optimistic about humanity, and so they
So they're well, Paul's just kind of Julian hits Paul like a tornado. I mean, Paul's a loner. He's gone through a difficult time at home with the suicide of his father, who was a cop for 20 years. And then here comes this seemingly very urbane, sophisticated, beautiful guy that dresses impeccably and seems to have all of these life experiences and sophistications that Paul doesn't have. And so Paul kind of falls for him just
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah.
Um, and Paul is never quite certain kind of what Julian sees in him, or what value Julian has in his friendship with him. And then the friendship turns into love and passion. But then there's this idea that they have about this scientific issue or philosophical issue about what is a moral person and morality. And so they decide to kind of test that on an empirical level in something that they call the game. And do you want to kind of explain that for us a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, they come to this in kind of a complicated way because there are a lot of interpersonal dynamics driving it too. But Paul in particular is very he has ideas about how you can like if you blaze your own trail as an independent person who chooses their own ethics, you can kind of change the world in your own image. Yeah, it's see, he's got thoughts on that, but it's so especially because he's driven by kind of a sense of the importance of moral independence, but also a deep, if very misguided at times, sense of justice. So they kind of come to this idea to do as sort of a philosophical experiment, sort of prove a point by committing a crime. And yeah, it's a couple of like, it was based on a few real life cases, and they tended to be people proving a point, like trying to commit the perfect murder to show that they could. And I wanted to do something different with these two because yeah, they're coming at it more from an angle of like they're proving a point about human nature. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to explore, and kind of how their ideas feed off each other in this kind of dangerous and toxic way, and yet they I feel like, at least for some readers, they're coming from an angle of understandable misanthropic views that are like a degree or two removed from what one might feel already. So I wanted it to be kind of a little kind of viscerally unsettling for some readers, because they to some degree might agree with them on issues of human nature and obedience, and then where that leads them is it's not good. So
Well, yeah, I don't want to give away too much of the story, other than
yeah,
they pursue this game that's based, I guess, upon this belief that people that have followed authority in their mind blindly just kind of lack some kind of human consciousness
yeah,
and and really sense of morality. And what it really reminded me of, and I was immediately reminded of Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky.
yeah,
This idea that a kind of a philosophical misanthropic guy decides that he knows the truth about who deserves to live and who doesn't, based upon his view of their immorality. And
yeah.
I don't know, was that at all an influence for you?
Oh, definitely. Like and that was a book that they would have been influenced by too, and not quite gotten the point of the book. There's a moment about midway through the book where Julian he starts out reading Camus' The Stranger, and then when he finishes that, he goes on to Crime and Punishment, and I just that was kind of a an inside joke for
I like that.
yeah. So it yeah, it was definitely an influence both on kind of what they think they're doing and what they don't realize they're doing. So
Well, and what I thought that you did so brilliantly is, there's this obsessive love going on, and they are so full of their own self-importance and conviction that you know following authority blindly, or not even blindly, but just following it despite any moral qualms or consciousness that you might have, is so wrong. But yet, in such a subtle and delicate way, you kind of throw the mirror on Paul and Julian's relationship, because that's kind of exactly what's going on there. Julian is, in some ways, forces Paul into some violent situations by telling him to do things, and Paul just kind of obeys, but they don't ever really seem to come to the recognition that their relationship is messed up in the way that they're being critical of some other people's as well.
yeah, it's the power dynamics are very they were very tricky to balance. It took several drafts to get it right. But yeah, it's they they they're very aware of systemic morality and the power it has over people. They're not as attuned to interpersonal morality. Like that part is very abstract to both of them, and so it's yeah, it's interesting because they are motivated by ideas, but also they're motivated by the fact that there's something very intoxicating when you're a teenager about friendships that make you feel special. That you especially if you're dealing with this like very charismatic person who kind of talks about how like I hate everybody except you because you're special. And when you're a teenager,
Yeah.
you feel like I'm special because this very charismatic and thoughtful person likes me and they don't like anybody else. And as an adult, you realize I hate everybody but you actually means you're next. But it's not something that is going to clock to a 17-year-old at all. Don't ask how I know that. But yeah, so they're a lot more motivated by emotion than they realize they are. Especially Paul. Paul is very like he uses philosophy to kind of intellectualize and justify to himself this really deep anger that he feels toward the world. So yeah, it's interesting how they are and are not clued into their own actions. Like they are determined to disobey systemic authority, and yet they've got this power dynamic where each of them kind of wants to have authority over the other. So it's an interesting.
Yeah, I'll just suffice it to say, to not give too much away, their intimacy isn't all that healthy.
No.
Let
No,
me put it that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Tell me why you decided to set the book in Pittsburgh.
A lot of it was practical convenience. I wanted there to be a working class Jewish community, and kind of I was interested in the fact that it's the time that it's set in Pittsburgh is just as the economy is starting to tank and the industrial the steel industry in particular is kind of taking a nosedive. And so it's in the very early stages of like this deterioration that I kind of wanted to reflect the it reflects the way the idealism of the 60s kind of deteriorates into the cynicism of the 70s. So it's kind of an architectural and aesthetic moment of decay in this city that reflects kind of the way the world is bearing down on these characters in general. And yeah, and also it's a very it's a beautiful city, and I'm very yeah sorry about that.
Have you spent much time in Pittsburgh?
I have visited. I've never lived there. But
Like you've
it's
actually driven around a decent amount because I mean Mount Lebanon is in there, and
yeah,
yeah, um, you do such a really great job, despite there's a lot of kind of extraordinary things that happen in the book and extraordinary relationships. The story of Paul's family is just really so sad and sweet.
yeah,
They're so close, and they've just gone through this tragedy of Paul's father um, committing suicide after 20 years on the police force. But the whole extended family kind of tries to come together and help buoy this family up. It's Paul and his two sisters and his poor mother, who is um, understandably having emotional problems after
yeah.
the suicide of her husband. But the grandparents are wonderful characters
Thank
too.
you.
I really love them. They felt so authentic to me.
Thank you.
And everyone's trying to help poor Polly here, who they feel like has never really had friends, has never dated a girl. They really don't understand him, but they really genuinely want to understand him.
Yeah,
Um, and so it causes him to kind of feel like he's living, and not only feel, I guess actually is living this kind of bifurcated life in a lot of ways, that he's trying to be, and not so much the son and the grandson and the brother that the family expect of him, but kind of at what they are used to him being, just kind of
yeah,
the shy, awkward guy. And when he's with Julian, he's not exactly that way, or he's a little bit different. And of course, there's the whole issue of their homosexuality that seems to be pretty apparent to the family, but not something that they can be entirely open about.
yeah.
So when you were kind of thinking about the type of family that you wanted Paul to be from, I guess maybe did that help kind of explain kind of how he might fall really into the Julian thing and the Julian influence so readily?
Yeah, yeah, it's a thing I wanted to do with Paul's family regarding his homosexuality in particular is very often these stories are either absolute family rejection or they're instantly on board. Like so I wanted to convey like this family that genuinely adores him, and they want so hard to be supportive of him in general, and they just don't get it, and they're very uncomfortable with the idea that he might be gay, and so it's so I wanted a loving family that was difficult for him, not just because he's queer, but also because he's just doesn't quite fit into what they expect the first generation college student, bright son of a working class family to be. Like they they have the you know prototypical idea, he's going to be a doctor someday, he'll grow out of being awkward, he'll find a nice girl, like it's a future that they want for him because they think it will make him happy. Like they genuinely want him to be happy, and they just can't really get that he finds this vision of him really alienating. And especially because he's 17, he's not really attuned to the fact that he's aware that they love him, but he doesn't really register it because he's at that age where you're like kind of selfish and not ascribing that much internality to your family. So he doesn't really their intentions register as positive with him, but it doesn't do much to make him feel less alienated, especially because he has sort of reacted to this trauma differently than everybody else. Like it kind of brings the rest of the family together and makes them more close knit, and they're really trying to take care of each other and shore each other up. And Paul is kind of withdrawing from them, and they're trying to stop him from withdrawing from. So it's, they're trying to bring him into the fold, and it's just it's, in some ways it works, in some ways it really doesn't. So it's a complicated family. I love all of those characters dearly. Like, I have deep affection for them, and yeah, I wanted, especially because Julian's family is difficult, I wanted to give Paul a family that it's like, they he is not their fault. They love him and they support him, and they don't handle everything perfectly. They even handle a couple things badly, but like, these are really decent people who did their best to raise him to be a good person, and he somehow drew on some of that to motivate himself to not do good things. It's this very interesting dynamic. It's I yeah, I love his family, and he is not their fault. But yeah,
I that's a really good description. I hadn't quite thought about it that way, in terms of how rare it is to have a depiction of a family who isn't is is kind of, in some ways, can see that their son, or can grow to see that their son is gay, but then just kind of, not really, there's never like a big scene where they're going to disown him necessarily or
yeah,
reject him or anything like that. And they're in a bit of denial, I think maybe you'd say, for some of it.
yeah,
It's interesting. Julian's mom, or I'm sorry, Paul's mom kind of falls under Julian's spell. She's very
yeah,
charmed by him, and
yeah,
also very, just, I think, grateful that he's Paul's friend, since
yeah.
Paul hasn't had many friends. But I love how, his older sister Audrey just like picks up on it, like I think it's like on page 9 or something. She says, like, he seems nice, but
Yeah,
there's something not right here. So she
yeah,
kind of nails it immediately.
yeah. And it's she probably had some obviously milder versions of that kind of friendship as a teenager herself, and it's a very recent memory for her, and she's also just very protective of Paul because he's her little brother. So yeah, she clocks Julian as trouble instantly, and I really enjoyed their dynamic, and for different reasons I also really enjoyed Julian's dynamic with Paul's mom. They just have, they interact in interesting ways, and then yeah, Audrey just doesn't, she doesn't take guff in general, and she just, yeah, so she, yeah.
I liked her. She's a cool character.
Thanks. I had fun with her.
What did chess plays a big role in this novel, and are you a big chess player?
I like playing chess, and I am not very good at it, but it's making an appearance in a work in progress too, so it's a motif that I find really interesting, and I like the way you can use it to kind of explore other people's ideas of like the logic that they're using, and kind of try to unpick what they're planning to do. It's an interesting way to get to know a person. So it's yeah, and I liked it as a motif because it's a game that's both rigorously logical, like it has very set rules, and you use formal logic to to do well in it, but also it's very creative. So it's sort of this interaction of art and emotion and rationality, that it reflects the boys' dynamic in some ways.
Yeah, it really does.
Um,
Yeah, I think that you did that well. When I was kind of making my notes for our discussion today, I was kind of thinking of all the kind of motifs that you use, and of course the chess is one. But there's also something, um, so beautiful and painful about Paul's butterfly hobby.
yeah,
Um, I think that Paul's very attracted to beautiful things.
Yes.
And he says a number of times that he wants to make something beautiful in the world that matters. He just doesn't quite know how to do it yet. Um, but he collects butterflies, and I just thought that it was a pretty powerful metaphor for me when I was reading the book about his kind of need to capture beauty, but then this violent part of him as well.
Yeah. Yeah, he clings to the things he loves. And part of that is for reasons of trauma. Like he definitely has issues about abandonment because of his father's suicide. But also he likes to capture beauty and keep it close, and it's reflected in the fact that he collects butterflies. I like to watch butterflies. It's a different personality that likes to collect them. It's so,
Right, because
so
you're
that
killing them in this.
yeah, it's like you have to be willing to kind of cause pain, um and so it's reflected in that. It's also it's reflected in the kind of art he likes to make. Like in the 70s, representational art was not fashionable, and he likes doing these very realistic, very precise, detailed works of art, that are very interested in anatomy and science and everything. And he's just doing his own thing. He's not into abstract anything. And so it's similar in that at a few points he does sketches and watercolors where he's trying to take a beautiful moment and kind of capture it and make it permanent somehow. And he struggles a lot with the fact that he can't really make it permanent, and he can't encapsulate the whole of a beautiful thing. Um, no matter what he does, no matter what he does to try and hold it still. Like even capturing a butterfly, part of its beauty is the fact that it's alive and moving, and he can't make peace with that. Um, so he's just always trying to keep things locked down, so that he can keep them. And yeah.
You're describing that a little bit. I wasn't quite sure how to wrap my head around this. I had like a couple of different theories that I was bouncing around, but once Julie and Paul start having sex, he realizes that Julian is his body, I guess, I think his face is pretty much fine, but his body is horribly scarred. He was in a really horrific uh, automobile accident, I think when he was 10, is that right?
Yeah.
And it literally like the accident almost cut his body in half. And so
Yeah.
he's got he's got lung issues because of it, but he's very visibly scarred, and that really, I think, it takes Paul aback at first, because he's used to viewing Julian as absolutely radiant and perfect
Yeah.
and beautiful, and then it's this, when he really sees him without clothes, it's like, wow, this is a very scarred body. But it's almost as though he goes to appreciate the scars in and of themselves as kind of like a type of a beauty that's born of violence in a way too, which kind
Yeah.
of something, I guess, about his personality.
Yeah, he's definitely aesthetically drawn to death. But and also I think a big part of the appeal for him is he respects Julian for surviving this horrible thing, and he's drawn to the idea that like he came so close to death and he conquered it. He imagines it being by sheer force of will. It's, you know, modern medicine more like, but he's got this very romantic idea that Julian came so close to death, and and yet he survived, and his body survived, despite this incredible violence. And so Paul is drawn to the aliveness that it symbolizes, as well as the violence of it. Before he sees anything but Julian's face, there's a bit early on where he notices Julian's smile is a little asymmetrical, and he has this thought about the Japanese aesthetic of wabi sabi, which is that if things are flawed, it adds beauty to them instead of detracting. And so I kind of, you know, I didn't mention it or anything, but I thought of the fact that traditionally, like when a ceramic item was broken, it would be fused back together with gold to kind of highlight the fracture, and enhance the beauty of it by showing that it it survived in a way, and it was loved enough to be held back together. And so it's a similar thing. I think he finds the imperfection endearing and also aesthetically fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I, I, I don't want to give anything away, but I think I think I would be remiss not to impress upon the people that are listening how much momentum this novel has. I mean, literally, as Julian and Paul are pursuing what we'll call the game, to kind of prove out this philosophical theory they have on morality, you don't know what's going to happen, and so you just keep turning the pages. And it in my mind, I felt like I was like really reading fast, just because the momentum is so um, is so rapid and the story is so compelling. But for anyone out there that loves a thrilling read, this is all you need for a long weekend to keep you busy, and you will be very satisfied.
Thank
Before
you.
we go, Mike, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, this is your debut novel, and this is probably not the way that you thought you would be rolling out
Yeah.
your first novel. So how is the whole COVID experience kind of um, skewed your expectations in terms of how to introduce this novel to readers?
Um, it's been kind of a bittersweet experience. Like it's been wonderful to have something like positive and momentous to focus on in the midst of all this the world we live in. And so it's I definitely had to kind of correct my expectations in terms of like, I'm going to have to put on a mask and gloves and make an appointment to go to my local indie to look at my book on a shelf. And that's just so I'm not going to have the version of that kind of pivotal rite of passage that I had envisioned when the book sold. But it's at the same time, I do feel like it's an interesting book for this time, because in terms of getting out of your own head, I hope it functions to kind of yeah, just I at least obsessed over it for a long time, and I hope it inspires that in some readers. That it just it's very um, yeah, it's a very narrow focus. It's written in very tight third person from Paul's point of view. So it's I tried to make it immersive, um, and at the same time there are parts of it that were unintentionally kind of timely, like especially the cynicism about authority and the government. Like it happens during Watergate, and obviously the degree of that and the nature of that are very different, but like it's at this time when there's a lot more cause to kind of be cynical about authority and whether moral authority or government authority. And so it's interesting. It's an interesting story to revisit during this time. But yeah, it's it's been an interesting experience and overall a good one, but definitely a little bittersweet.
And how have you been spending your time? I think Seattle's still pretty shut in, right?
Yeah, and I have asthma, so I went like DEFCON 1 the second there was a death in the area. Like I've not left the house much in 6 months. So I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been doing a lot of baking. I did the stereotypical millennial sourdough starter thing. And then I killed it recently, unfortunately. But I did make a bunch of sourdough in the
And
meantime.
I have to tell folks that on your website, you've got some awesome looking dessert recipes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I cooking and baking are a long-standing hobby of mine. I've been getting especially into baking because it's comforting. And so yeah, I do a little bit of recipe design. It's a nice side hobby, and right now it feels really it's really viscerally calming and satisfying because there's this primal need to nest in times of trouble. And so I feel like I am making the home cozy. I am bringing nice things into the home, and I'm feeding nice things to the family. I'm making them feel loved. So so that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm definitely still baking. Gotta keep baking.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, baking is a very nurturing thing, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, have you been reading anything that you want to recommend?
I just finished The Lightness by Emily Temple, and I absolutely loved it. Like it's interesting. It's a little bit of thematic overlap with TBD in that it's about it's sort of philosophically driven, obsessive homosocial friendships. But it's a very it's beautifully written, and it's sort of about the elusiveness of memory, and the way it's written, it just it it's told sort of with little philosophical asides and fragments, and it absolutely justifies that. And it's yeah, it's a really beautiful, very strange book, and absolutely recommend it.
Great. And you are working on another book yourself?
Yeah, I've got a couple works in progress that are kind of fighting with each other. We'll see which one comes out on top and gets to be written first. One of them is it would be a shorter novel, and it's about it's another thing that has some body horror elements because that's how I do. But it's about sort of um another kind of repressed queer love story, and where these two girls kind of bond over their fascination with serial killers and violence and stuff, and they're like they're not it's not the unhealthy kind of relationship that's presented in TVD, but there's that like hyper intense emotional stuff going on that's very teenager. And then there's a longer book in the
These Violent Delights. I wanted to make sure people knew what TVD
okay, yeah,
was.
okay. Yeah, it's
And then, I'm sorry, a longer book.
yeah, it's this thing's gonna be a beast. It's a lot more like straight literary fiction. Um and it's about a family of chess prodigies. So it's like I keep coming back to chess. This will probably be my big chess thing. But it's got an ensemble cast. It's got a timeline of about 10 years. It's got a lot of really complicated family dynamics that I have to unpick and develop. And so it's gonna be it's very ambitious. We'll see how it goes. But I feel compelled to write it for some reason. Like it's one of those things where it just like I need to write it for myself, and we'll see what happens. So
Well, I people who come to Interrobang Books, my store, know that there's nothing I love more than an 800 or 900 page novel. I just, there's something immediately attractive to me, and
oh,
almost
good.
compulsive to like, oh, the bigger it is, I'm like, I'm ready for it. And I don't know, it says something probably weird about me, but well, Micah, thank you for being with us today. I'm really excited to put your book into a lot of readers' hands. I think that it's got something for everyone, but mostly if you just want to get lost in a great story for a few days, this is it. But oh, I know what I wanted to ask you before I let you go. There's got to be people asking you about movie rights for this book, correct?
I there's a film rights agent. I don't know what's happening on that end. Yeah,
This has got to be made into a movie. I mean,
I would like that very much.
sometimes I say that about books that just are kind of like, um, I don't know, I call them kind of like a Netflix book. Like you can, when you're reading it, you're just like, okay, yeah, I can see this car chase scene, you know, and this is not anything like that. It's much deeper. It's extremely substantive, but man, some of the just the imagery that you get when you're reading the book, you just want to see it on screen.
Oh, thank you. I'm a very visual person, and I kind of see the book as a movie in my head. Like it would be so weird to see someone else's blocking and framing because it's like it. So it's yeah, I can visualize a lot of it. So it'd be really interesting to see how someone else interpreted it. But
Well,
yeah,
good luck with that. Good luck with your
thank
other
you.
books, and good luck with this launch on September 15th.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been lovely to talk to you.
All right, bye bye.
Bye bye.